everyone. So to continue with lists in Rhino or Grasshopper and how information is stored and also how the components and linking these components to each other works is going to be the portion of this tutorial. So there's three ways the wires are represented within Grasshopper. There's the dash, there's the double line, and then there's a single line. The single line means that there's just one element within a list. The double line means that there's more than one, and then the dash line means that there's more than one list within a list. So to show this clearly, if we have two curves here and I generate them within Rhino, I can set one of the curves and set the second one. And what happens is there's a single curve that's being fed into this component right here because it's asking for one curve. And then you can see that from this action there's a series of points that are allocated across that line. So this is a list of points, therefore there's a double line. To show you what a list within a list looks like, if we set this, you start to see that there's two curves being fed into one curve. So then there's a curve that's holding two curves information. There's two reference curves in this. And then you can see that the points from these two curves are still associated to those curves. So this is the points of that first curve. These are the points of that second curve. But they're both within the single curve component, and therefore they're within one list. You'll notice these yellow boxes are called panels. You can think of them as like post-its or just text boxes within Grasshopper. You can call them out by typing in panel, and what it does is it's just a way to feed out information of what's going on. It'll just tell you what is actually happening and what is being processed inside your component. If you look at them, they start with the indexing at 0. Therefore, if you have 8 elements, you're going to have 0 through 7 instead of 1 through 8. Just a point to remember when you're trying to call information. Like if I wanted to call out the first item in this list, I would call out item 0 because 0 is the first one. You'll also notice that in this upper right hand corner, it shows you how many lists you have within your panel. So this is the first list within our list panel, and then this is the second list within that panel. And there's a total of two lists with 7 or 8 elements within those lists. So here's another simpler example of a curve referencing some geometry in Rhino, and you can see it's reference planar curve, but there's only one element in there, so it's a solid line. Here is another element or component, and it has more than one amounts of information in it, and even though it's not working and there's nothing there, there's still 2, so therefore there's a double line. And then here is a series of 6 lists with one element in each list, so therefore there's a dash line because it's a series of lists within lists. All of this information matters more so with how we manage data and how Grasshopper starts to organize data and how it thinks throughout its components. It'll become clear with application of when you need to have single elements and when you need to have items isolated into lists. Just some graphical terms of organization within your Grasshopper space. If you select a series of elements or components, you can deselect by holding down Control and typing them. You can hold down Shift and select multiple ones. If you hit Control G, it'll make a group for you, and then this group will hold them together. You can still move elements around inside of them and push it out. If you right click on this, there's an empty box that's not highlighted. This is the group name or group title, and you can write in text and information in here. Generally when I hand things off to you, I will leave little notes of what you're supposed to do and what is going on in a very descriptive way. You could start to use this as a way to somehow call out some pseudocode for what's going on, just to keep it clear as you are working as a beginner throughout Grasshopper. Then in terms of connecting up your components, the way that you do this is you can also hit Control G, ungroup right click ungroup to ungroup everything. So in terms of your components, the way that you start to link things is you click down, drag the tail over to the curve, and then just snap it in and let go. This will connect up that. If you want to connect up this curve to multiple inputs, you would hold down Shift, you get a little plus, and then you can push this in to multiple areas. If you want to deselect one, you hit Control and then hit minus. And then also within your component, if you have multiple inputs, if you right click, well, you can't. Sometimes there's a way, there we go. If you disconnect, you can disconnect set curves and it'll highlight that, and you can disconnect it this way as well. I think if you, no, yeah, so that's just another fashion. Instead of control, you can deselect it that way. Right, for connecting up the outputs, it's the same kind of thing, just control and minus. And you should always note that your information will always be coming from an output and going into an input. You can't have the information coming from an output and then going back into an output of another one. This is a linear connection and a linear association between these, so you will always have the information going in from an output. So to look at lists, this is not only does it think the organization of the wires, this is important for how it graphically represents what's going on, but you should also know that how it thinks of how it's organizing this information. So therefore, if we have a series of points in stream A and stream B, what Grasshopper would automatically do if I asked it to connect up all of these points with lines is that it would default to longest list. This is important because what happens is the way in which information starts to be organized will matter in case you are trying to do some kind of iterative or recursive process. You need to know the way that it's sorting out this information for your procedure. So if I type in line, this is a 2-point line, and I connect this up. This means that there's no information provided yet. I'm going to select my series of multiple points. I'm going to select them individually because if I just drag and select all of them, it would select them, sometimes this works, randomly. It's working now. Sometimes it cross-matches the lines. I think it might order them in the way that they were drawn, so in this way that I did draw them all that way, but sometimes it flips around. So if you ever drag select and they're crossed, I would suggest that you select them in an order, or anything in an order in which you want it to be selected, so that the component knows which is first and which is last. So in this term, you can see from these 6 points or 8 points that the longest list, which is 5, is connected up to all of the points at the top. But this also means that because we didn't give it any other information, that this last point is receiving 3 lines from the last 2 that we have here. So if we didn't want that to happen, if we type in, let's say I wanted to make a list, but I want it to be a shorter one, you can Control-C, Control-V to copy your component. This component will truncate the organization of your information based off of the shortest list, and this one was called shortest list as well. You can see it here, shortest list. Just a note, if you do copy things like I just did, I left this on, you can see because it's light gray, and I left these guys on, they're light gray as well. To hide this information, you can select it, middle mouse button push down, and select the disable preview button. So therefore, this information is still linked between the two. However, I can't see it, so therefore I can work in this one for right now. If I select this, you can see clearly, okay, these are the green, this is what I'm working with right now, and these are the points that I was working with. So in this one, you can see that it's determining the longest list is, or the shortest list is 3, so therefore any information past 3 in the longest list is just going to be disregarded. And then there's the third option of organizing information, which is cross-reference. What this does is it takes everything and matches everything with everything. And sometimes you will want this. So therefore you can see I'm going to disable preview of this definition, and I'm just going to look at this one right now. And right here you can see that all of my points are connected up with every other point. And if I were to move this, it would still work. So in terms of a concept of how this information starts to matter, when you have a list of information and it's being stored as a list, as in this one. So this was our example of we have two curves that are going into one curve. This was just for point in case so that you could see that there's two curves here, and they're being fed into this component. So we have two curves in this one component, and it's outputting a list of all of those points. So all of this information is smashed into one list, but there's two lists within here. This is a way to have your information stored separately. There's another method in which it would be more similar to this kind of deal, where there's just one list with a bunch of elements. This is called flattening. So what this does is it takes all of the information and it puts it into one list, regardless of what it was associated with before. And this, in terms of Grasshopper, is called grafting. It means that you're putting information into separate lists so that you can access it differently. You can think of this as the way that you hand in presentation files. So if I say I want a folder with your presentation file in it, I'm going to take all of these folders with their files and put them into one folder, and then therefore I can access them at later points and put your sequential presentations in those folders. It's just a way of isolating information so that you can do something with it at a later point. So this is called grafting. Flattening is if I were to ask for all of your files in just one, and I'll just store them in one folder. That means that there's no hierarchy to the arrangement. If I get more files from you, they all go together in this one open space. And in the next tutorial, we're going to show you paneling and how that this type of information can help you, and when you isolate it and graft it, you can call out specific elements within a surface.